Hello, Sales Hacker community. As always, I'm Scott Barker, Head of Partnerships and Revenue at Sales Hacker, and I'll be moderating this discussion today. And definitely excited, to spend the next hour or so with you all. Happy belated Martin Luther King Day. Hope everyone got out and showed some love to their community. But all right, what we're talking about today is how to generate pipeline with a successfully proven coaching culture. So this is kind of the mecca. It's what we're all going for. And, it seems that at every organization, sales coaching, just can't be neglected, especially when it starts, preventing your team from hitting that quota. And research shows that more than 60% of sales reps say that they'll leave an organization if their boss is a poor sales coach, while 75% of businesses believe that sales coaching is the most important thing sales leaders do, the most important thing. But more than 47% of managers spend less than 30 minutes coaching each rep per week. So most important thing, but we're spending 30 minutes on it. Doesn't seem to add up. So really enabling your sales team with a set of best practices can mean the difference between a winning and a losing sales playbook. And so that's a little bit of what we're going to be talking about today. And I got to tell you, I learned a lot just going through the prep calls with these two gentlemen here. So, but before I introduce them, super quick housekeeping matters. As always, we'll be recorded, guys. So you got to jump into a meeting, you got to close a deal, do so. We'll send this out. Typically takes about 24 hours. So don't worry, it's coming. And then second, get involved. As always, these discussions are for the community. So if you have some relevant questions, please jump on, introduce yourself, let us know your title, and get involved in the discussion. All right, got that out of the way. Now it's time to introduce my two awesome guests. I am joined by Matt Belinskiy, who is the head of customer success over at chorus.ai. You might not know that when Talkable, when at Talkable, Matt was the first paid customer of Chorus. So you were at Talkable. Were you head of customer success there as well?
Yeah, at the time I was.
Yeah. So the first paid customer, that's pretty cool. That's a cool story. And then making that jump over. And prior to Chorus, you worked in roles managing sales ops, sales enablement, data analytics, and customer success. And at Chorus, you and the team work with the fastest growing companies as you continue to just evangelize Chorus and this, exploding conversational intelligence space. So excited to have you. And
thank you. Thank you very much.
I follow you on Twitter now as well. The data guy.
Yeah, the data guy on Twitter. That's me.
It's a good handle. You must have got that one a little while back.
That's another long story for another time.
Okay, we'll get there. And then I am also joined by Kyle Bastian, Director of Sales Enablement over at Drift, the rocket ship over there. And in the past, you've actually been a quota-carrying sales rep and also a director at public companies and early-stage startups. And kind of your view on sales is that it is the best job in the world, which I would agree, and loves nothing more than helping people enter the matrix. Now, I have to, we talked about this a little bit before, but what is the matrix in your eyes?
Yeah, the matrix is, when I started saying that at first, I didn't know what it was called. I think now people call it flow, but it's when you're like in the zone, everything melts away, and you're just having a great conversation with somebody, and you completely forget about your quota, your number, the outcome of the call or whatever. And if you can reach that state, by kind of letting go of everything around you, you end up being the most effective salesperson you can possibly be. So that's what I want everyone to feel, that we're on the call, because it's the best feeling in the world.
I love it. I love that. And I agree. I feel like I hit flow, or I did as a rep, right until I had to write the follow-up email. And then I would crush
and then it goes crashing back down to earth. I know.
Yeah. Cool. So I also heard a rumor that you two used to help produce a show or something. So these two guys know how to entertain. And anyway, so as we dive into it, it was super funny. So I moderate a lot of these things, and there's a lot of prep that goes in, behind the scenes. And we were on a prep calls together, And I literally had to tell these two guys that there was just too much juice in this webinar. It's like there's too much, and people will not be able to retain all of these nuggets. So I was able to convince them. We're actually going to break this up into two parts. So this will be part one, and part two will be happening on February 7th. So if you like what you hear today, you're enjoying the conversation, make sure you join us for part two, February 7th, same time. And really what we're going to be talking about specifically in part one, what is sales coaching? Why is it so important? Number two, adopting a coaching program assumes reps, have all these things that are bought in. So why isn't everyone doing this? And then lastly, we're going to talk about, assuming everyone wants to overcome these limitations, what do you recommend they measure, and then how do we overcome it? So those are kind of what we're going to be diving into. And without further ado, I'm going to shut up and hand the reins over to Matt, because we got some juicy content to get through.
Cool. Hi, everyone. So I'm so glad to be here, and I'm glad to be here with Kyle. Let's jump right into it. So I'm going to throw up a slide. But before I do that, I just wanted to reiterate what Scott was saying. So today in part one, we're going to cover some content. Over the next week or so, I'm going to publish an article on Sales Hacker that's going to be how you can start your coaching program now, a crawl, walk, run approach. And then we're going to do part two in 2 weeks. And then Kyle's going to share some insight, some templates and other things so you can start operationalizing your coaching program as soon as possible. So excited about that, the journey for the next couple of weeks. Kyle, want to add anything else?
No, this is going to be great. Yeah. And it was like, in preparing for this, I didn't even really prepare. We were just, Matt and I meet all the time. We just like basically continued on the conversation that we kind of like, have often. So this like pretty quickly got out of control. So I'm glad we're getting a chance to do this. So let's have at it.
Cool. All right. So let's start here. 84% of all sales training is lost after 90 days. So this is a stat that we found, we thought it would be relevant. So I was hoping, Kyle, we could talk about training. A lot of companies, a lot of organizations are wanting to invest in their employees. They're invested in training. They have a training. Then things don't take. What happens? Walk me through the process. What's going on in that organization? Yeah.
So, and I've definitely done this. I've given those trainings. I've received those trainings. And what happens is, you go in and you think about something that like the company needs to be better. Like, closing. Our close rates aren't good enough. So we're going to do something on objection handling or whatever it is. Let's assume that they diagnose correctly what it is they need to coach the reps on, that they then need to work on that's going to like be the highest leverage thing that's going to lead to more results. So they develop training and content, and let's even assume that it's good and it's the right training and content. No matter what happens is when you leave that room, some people, and these guys are probably going to be your top performing reps, are going to get it and they're going to directly marry like intellectual, like conceptualization of the topics to be able to then go do it. And that might be 20-25% of the people in the room. They're just going to get on the floor and be like, yep, makes sense. I can visualize myself doing it. And they go and do it and they get it and they internalize it. And we love those people. We wish we could clone them. And then you've got people in the middle that are going to like, they're like great work ethic and they're very coachable and they're going to go try it, but it's not going to land right away. It's going to be a little ham-fisted and it's going to need some reinforcement and some work, or else they're going to get frustrated and they're going to stop doing it because it's just not coming out right the very first time. And then some people are going to say either that's really interesting or I don't agree with it, but for whatever reason, they're going to go back to their desks and they're going to do exactly what they were doing before that training. And there's going to be no change in behavior. So that's how that goes. Every time you guys go into a classroom and like give a training, my experience is that's how it's going to break just about every single time afterwards.
So tell me about, if training is like a one and done kind of situation, tell me about the evolution of how we go from training to coaching.
Yeah. So the stat that I like here, and you're going to kill, I'll have to give you guys a source afterwards, but it's like 70% of learning happens from doing rather than like understanding conceptually. So I would even like broaden that. So the way I think about it now and what I try to operationalize here at Drift is a 4-to-1 ratio of coaching to training time. So for every hour where I might bring you into a classroom and do a whiteboard exercise or something like that, there's 4 hours of either role playing or coaching on a call, like listening to it afterwards through Chorus or Gong, and like doing that, that kind of reinforcement on how they actually did it in the field. So coaching is basically like, it's taking training, which is like knowledge, and seeing how that translates into skill building, which is the ability to do something effectively in a customer facing situation. And so like training like literally doesn't work if you're trying to get people to change their behavior. You have to then like listen to their calls, give pointed feedback. That feedback needs to be done like immediately after the training, like their very next call, so that you can even connect it to the training that they were given. And that kind of feedback loop is what I would characterize as coaching.
That's good. And if anyone out there has any examples of being in the same situation where you double down on training, and then you had the same experience, we'd love to hear from you. So please write your questions and your feedback in. Scott's going to help moderate. So Kyle, I want to hear a little bit about, there are a couple of like concepts that get thrown out there a lot. There's sales enablement, sales coaching, sales training, and some people are sales trainers that do a component of this and that. Once and for all, I'm hoping you and I can align on how we define this.
Sure. So so there's enablement, and enablement means 10 things to 10 different people when you ask them.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think what we have here is how I think about it, which there's a lot that goes into producing sales enablement, but the customer is the customer facing professionals in your organization. That's who enablement serves. It's traditionally been sales, but more and more it's starting to become CS and support as well. And it's basically giving them the coaching, the training, and the content that they need to have great conversations with your prospects and with your customers. That's what enablement is. And usually those things should all be delivered in concert. So I try not to like give training without like a quick reference guide. I'm not going to give somebody content unless I train them on how to use it. And I'm not going to do either unless I've thought in advance, like how I'm going to reinforce it and like budgeted that time and the calories you have to burn on that into the program before starting it.
That's good. All right, fantastic. So now that we've kind of gotten our ducks in a row, we have some context of how we think of the world. I want to drill into, I'm going to stop sharing so we can have more of a dialogue here. And I'd love to start learning about the genesis of the coaching program, either that you're currently managing. I'm specifically looking, I'm just going to pull up my notes here.
Yeah.
I want to talk about the perceived results of a coaching program. So inevitably, I'll just tee this up for a second. Everybody who wants to implement a coaching program wants to impact change and change something, but they don't necessarily always know what to measure. And so I'm curious to know from you, like in your experience when you started to convince others that a coaching program was required, what was the perceived result that you communicated to them to get them excited and believe in you?
Yeah, well, so there's a couple things. I think if you're part of an organization that's already like had failed attempts at training or coaching, that's a pretty big motivator for like doing it right and articulating that. But like the way you kind of sell this well, first of all, I'll say this. Salespeople across the board are kind of having a tough time with things right now. There's been a lot of research out there about the percentage of people that are hitting quota. Like turnover rates are getting worse in a lot of different places. And so there's like, it's not like as a profession, we're out there like cleaning up right now. So I don't think it's going to be too hard of a sell to get the bosses on board with investing in training and coaching. Now, the thing about it is that, nobody wants to make any investments without having some idea about how they're going to prove the ROI on that. So when it comes to kicking this thing off, I think it's really important to, one, and understand the pace of learning. And I made this mistake when I first started coaching, where I like set out a very aggressive schedule. It's like, well, we're going to nail, discovery in week 1, and then we're going to do the product demo in week 2. We'll do closing in week 3, and I'll have like fully formed, adult reps by 3 weeks, and then we'll just, kick back or whatever. It takes people longer to like really get it because, like I said, there's 4 times as much coaching as training. So it takes like, 4 times longer for the skill to set in as it takes you to produce the training. So you got to budget that in. So with that in mind, like you might focus on one thing that you think has the most leverage in your sales rep space. Like what's the one thing that if we were doing better at this, we think we'd have materially better conversations with our customers. And if you don't have like your company's like story down, you know, that's definitely where you want to start. It's like, what's special about you? What can you teach the world about the space that you operate in? And like equipping your reps to be great teachers. If you don't have that, that's definitely the thing you want to do. And then you got to think about like, what is the thing that's going to influence? Because we can't just say revenue. We do, of course, want to hold ourselves accountable for influencing revenue. But there's so many other things that go into that you got to like take it a layer deeper and be like, look, I'm going to get reps like hitting quota in a shorter period of time, or I'm going to get them, like their close rates are going to improve. And Matt, as you know, like we work with Chorus to do that here at Drift. And the idea was that like, look, we want to improve close rates in 60 days, but even 60 days is a long time to learn something. So conversational intelligence platforms are great for saying like how often are we even talking about certain things on the calls, and then like measuring that, you know, and like using that as a leading indicator, like, hey, we think if we were talking about, you know, this messaging more, that we'd be having better conversations. Okay, how often are we having that conversation now? And what do we want to get that to over what period of training? And then using that as a leading indicator for the result that's coming down the way. So I guess to answer your question concretely, I know we went on a little tangent there.
Okay.
Think through like how, like what the kind of layers are, the steps are that is going to lead to the result of more revenue, and make clear exactly what you're going to point your training and coaching at before you go and ask for the investment to pull that off.
I have another way of looking at this same kind of question, because I can foresee people who say, all right, I've signed up for a revenue target or some form of metric that we're going to improve drastically, and coaching is the solution, but I have no idea how to get there. Mm-hmm. And so in their mind, they're thinking, wow, I have to boil the ocean now because I've committed to doing this. How am I going to do it? So in my experience with our customers, they choose bite-sized wins, you know, quick wins at the beginning and then a succession of wins all along. And they're constantly saying how they're making progress. I'm curious to know, like, when you implemented this program that we're eventually going to share more of over this and the next session, what's like initial, what are the initial bite-sized chunks that you came up with individually so that you could share that success with your team?
Yeah, so I think the first thing was like, you know, we had a pretty large sales team at the time. We still do. It was like 55 people on the floor. And so it was like, yeah, to get that many people up to speed was going to be crazy. So one of the first things was like, where do we have like the most willing learners, and where is like my biggest partner in sales leadership to start doing this with right away? And like we had the juice to just like throw down on them and be like, hey, you need to do this now. Like, this is what we're doing and you need to reinforce it. But I think we all know that's not going to be effective. Even if people just like say they'll do it in the meeting and then go on the floor and be like, F this, you know? So the first thing I did was like found a partner in sales management that was like, it had started around the same time I was really interested in diving into this and getting it off the ground. And that, Matt, you gave me that suggestion, and it was spot on.
It's always easier to implement something when you have a trusted partner. Mm-hmm. And if you don't know who that is, you find someone on the team, someone that you can bond with, and then all of a sudden things get easier to do because you have a friend in some other team to make it happen with.
Yeah, and the guy I picked on was the newest, and you know the poor guy just didn't know any better. So he and we were in the same like hiring class. So I was like, hey, let's do this, and so we were off and running. And there's always going to be people too that are going to be somewhat resistant to training. And it's usually your veteran folks that have like had a string of success and they have a way of doing it, and they're going to President's Club, and some of them are going to want to learn, but some are going to be like, hey man, I no disrespect, but I just kind of got this, you know, and I'm good. And another thing is like, you don't need to pick that fight either. On the one hand, like, look, if they're successful, they're successful. And like, that's fine. You know, if it's not broke, we don't need to fix it. The other thing is like, as you start training new reps up and like, you know, like less experienced reps, and they start kind of catching up on leaderboards, and maybe kicking them out of the President's Club race and stuff like that, that tends to get people's attention and breeds willingness for training when they start to see success with people that are like ready to learn. So that was great advice, Matt. And that was one of the first things we did. God, what else? The other thing was like thinking it in terms of like weekly sprints, which is like let's introduce one thing, like even like a micro thing, like a digestible piece of like content or one thing to work on or fix this week, and then just reinforce that one thing, kind of like steer all of our efforts into literally doing that skill better over that period of time rather than multiple things at once.
Yeah, my insight there is developing a coaching program is one thing, implementing it is another, and then actually having adoption is a whole nother beast. And something that works really well for our customers is whatever the cadence is of the coaching program, doing it the same exact thing over and over and over again until that muscle is created. Mm-hmm. And then you can introduce complexity and more education and more insight. But it's a new thing that most people don't know how to do. And anyway, that's where we're going to go. We're going to talk about something else next. So the next thing I want to talk to you, Kyle, about is coaching program. A lot of people have joined us. I see there's a whole bunch of attendees on here. It's fantastic. We would assume everyone's bought into coaching. Everybody wants to do it. Everybody needs to do it. But can you tell us, like, who are the important people to get bought into a program? Is it an executive? Is it a manager? Is it someone else? Like, who needs to be involved in a coaching program?
Yeah. So frankly, everybody. And there's like the VP of sales and the CRO needs to give you the kind of like air cover and sponsorship of the program. The alignment with the managers is completely critical. And then of course the reps, right? Like they've got to be bought into receiving the coaching and that the coaching that they're getting is good and helpful. So, I mean, it's hard to even like weigh the importance of either of them. I think if the reps don't think what you're doing is helpful, they're just not going to do it, and that's such a heavy lift. If you're not bought in with them. So I'll give you one tip for each group for getting their buy-in. That's a good way to do this, right? So with the reps, the easiest way to get their buy-in and training is to present them with their sales calls. And it's like everybody, like right now, maybe the words out of my mouth sound good on the webinar. I bet if I were listening to the recording, I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe that's how I sound. That's how every sales rep is. It always sounds better in their head coming out of their mouth in the moment than it does on film and recording. So like some of the most like intransigent sales reps possible, I'll just sit them down with a recorded call and be like, hey, I heard some really good stuff in here and I heard some teachable moments. I want you to listen to this and get your feedback on what you hear. And you'll play it and they'll be like, I got one of the reps who was like most resistance to coaching ever. I played her one segment of a call and she literally said, I don't know why anybody ever buys from me. And she definitely was not bad, you know what I mean? But like that is the overreaction that people tend to have when they hear themselves recorded for the very first time. So that's a great way to get the reps bought in. For the managers, for them, it's all about tools, right? Like a lot of them, at least I remember when I was like a sales director, coaching was the thing that I liked to do. And I felt that I wished I had spent more time doing. It was, for some reason, it always seemed like it could be put off or done later. It didn't seem as urgent as whatever the fire drill of the day was. So I didn't do as much of it. And so I think most managers are like that and they don't necessarily know how to coach and coach with consistency. So one of the things that you hear is like, do we know what good is? Do we know what we're listening for? And then the other mistake that managers and coaches make is that they want to like give 20 pieces of feedback, or they'll listen to a sales call and they'll jump in at like every single thing that could have been done a different way that might've been more effective. So what we try to do is like simplify it and think like in any given sales call, there's maybe like 3 to 5 inflection points where the deal's either going to be won or lost, and like in the back and forth of a conversation, there's a few really critical moments that come up where it's going to break one way or the other. And so if you can train coaches and managers to focus on those things, teach them what to listen for and how to evaluate those, and like give them a physical tool, whether it's a scorecard or a notepad or something that helps them hone in and provide coaching around those moments, it makes it more efficient and more effective for them. And that's a great way to get their buy-in. And directors are easy. I mean, I think we almost have touched on that one. The key there, it's like everybody wants to coach, and I've made this mistake where I'll say like, look, I'm going to coach these guys in discovery. And they say, well, how are we going to know if they're doing it better? And then what's the expected outcome when they do discovery better? And if you don't have good answers for that, then you're going to have a tough time getting executive sponsorship for your coaching program. So think through exactly, to the previous question and answer, exactly how are you going to measure progress in a week, progress in a month, and then results in a period of time that are really going to drive the bottom line. And don't try to bite off more than you can prove in a 2-month period.
I love that. And I'll just quickly jump in. I don't even want to interrupt you guys because this is such a good combo, but I got to be the voice of the people. And we've got a quick question here that I think is a great question, actually. So thank you. So you mentioned, this was a little while back, but you mentioned these like 3 types of learners, the ones that get it, ones that will try it, and ones that just, won't implement the training. And based on your experience, do you think that those groups are fixed based on their learning ability, or can you actually influence the percentage in each group based on how you're serving up the training? Interesting question. Start with Kyle, and I'm going to put you on the spot there too.
So if I understand the question, I'm hearing that as like, is that a matter of medium, right? Mm-hmm. Or like, do some people learn better with like a piece of paper, some people with a video, some people with live training? I hope that's the nature of the question, if that's what you're getting at. Is that how you heard that, Scott?
Yeah, that's kind of how, and feel free to jump in and correct us if we're not, but I kind of understand it as, have you maybe found a medium or a way of presenting that maybe more people get it and more people are in the get it category, or maybe a one that more people found were in the won't implement it category?
Yeah, so the way I think about that, there's a quote, I don't know who said it first, but it's like, you can't think your way into a new way of acting. You have to act your way into a new way of thinking. And so if people don't get it, like talking about it isn't going to make people get it, so in cases like that, like there's nothing to conceptualize. Like at some point we've like chewed this over from every angle. We've shown you the video, we've done the whiteboard, we've role played it. If you're still not sinking in, then you kind of got to be like, look, I need you to take it on faith that this is going to work, and like, it's kind of like, I'm not asking, I'm telling. I want you to try this behavior, but time box it. And I know it takes 3 weeks, like the studies show, to like build a habit. And so what we're talking about really now is habit building. And so it's like, if I can get you to build the habit, it will then feel different. You'll think about it different, but I know 70% of your learning isn't going to happen until you do it. So we can talk about it for all you want. We're still only getting 30% of there, even if we're on board. So I need you to just go out, try it for your next demos for 3 weeks. And if you can give me 3 weeks and it's not working and you don't feel different, then we'll try a different approach. And maybe this training just won't work for you. Maybe it's outside of your style or something like that, and we can work with that. So that flexibility is key, but it's kind of like, look, I'm not saying, change your life forever. Give me 3 weeks to try this thing and see if you don't feel different. And then we can go from there.
I love that. And reiterating, act yourself into a new way of thinking. I love that. Mm-hmm. And I love all the chat that's going on as well. We've got a bunch of chat. If you do have a question, I will be fielding them from the Q&A section, just letting everyone know. Matt, you share the same kind of viewpoints?
I do. I think that, so at Chorus, we have a platform that's phenomenal. I mean, I'm obviously an advocate for it and love it, but I find that our customers are coming to us as thought leaders to say, hey, we want to use your product to implement a coaching program, but we don't know how to do it. And I think that's valid. I think that it's a new thing for most people. And we've been lucky enough to work with some very big, fast-growing companies that had to get it right, had to figure out how to do it a while ago. And so since then, we've built our own knowledge to know what works and what doesn't work. And I think that one of the best moments I ever had with Kyle when we were working together, when he was implementing this coaching program. And Kyle, I don't want to speak too much. I'll let you like jump in, but
Sure.
there were a couple of times where I just said, stop what you're doing and let's make it simple. Like, keep it simple. Let's come up with like a quick win for what it would be in 5 days, then revisit in 5 days what it could be after. And maybe Kyle, you can reiterate that, talk about that a little bit more. Someone who's nervous to get started and you just want to tell them simplify, define simplification.
Yeah. So, I think that's a great like dovetail to what we were just talking about, where like the simplest thing to do is like something now. So it's like for us, it was like, hey, how about just like set a goal for how, like, I'm going to listen to like 3 calls today and 3 tomorrow. And I'm going to do 15 calls this week. And at the end of the week, I'll do 15 calls. And I guarantee, like, anybody, if you guys listen to like 15, like similar type calls, like first call demos, or if you're in CS, like your onboarding calls, or like some similar kind of business outcome call, if you listen to 15 over the course of the week, it is impossible for you not to come away with like 1 to 3 themes of like things that are really working in our calls, or things that, we probably want to focus on improving, or like, man, I didn't realize that this was or was not being talked about so much in a call. I didn't realize so many people had questions about that, something like that, that will kind of like, point the coaching cannon at something that will have leverage behind it. So yeah, something as simple as like, how do we build a coaching culture? It's like, a coaching culture is just like, we're going to evaluate your performance, give you feedback, and that's it. Another thing you can do too, I don't want to jump around, but I just thought about this, is one thing that worked for me too was like, I got on the phone, I took a few calls, like in my first couple of weeks of the program. And like the first coaching session that we ever did was me on the phone. And I gave all the reps a chance to like rip my call apart. So that goes a long way to getting by it, is like, hey guys, listen, this is just part of the gig. I'm coming from a place of making it better, and nobody's above feedback. And that includes me. So, here's one of my calls. Let's have a field day on this and just break the ice. And this is how we're going to do it.
That's an awesome takeaway right there.
That's a lot of fun. Yeah.
Vulnerable, like
especially if you're you're the agent of change that's implementing this. You have to lead by example and show that if someone else is going to be vulnerable, you might as well be yourself.
Totally. Love it.
All right. So to take this back for a second, Scott, if that's okay. So before the question, we talked about 3 things. We talked about, as an individual rep, you can have the rep sit down. You can play their own call back to them, and then you can ask them what they think about the call. And in that moment, they have all of a sudden become a coach of themselves. And that's how they start building that muscle. For the managers, it's about the tool, the conversational intelligence platform, understanding how to create leverage because they might not have enough time. And then for directors, it's usually always the same. Directors and executives, they want to know how quickly it can be implemented, what the impact will be, and how to measure the results. And so hopefully to the broader audience here, as we go through the rest of today and then in our next session, this will become crystal clear to you what you can do and what you can do now. So the next thing we wanted to talk about are the 3 most common limitations of why coaching programs don't work at the beginning, at the inception point. And so we put together a slide. I'm going to share it here. It's just 3 pillars of 3 limitations. And the first one is, managers are resistant to change. Because not just managers, but Kyle mentioned there are seasoned, tenured reps that are resistant to change because they've been doing things in a traditional way, and they don't necessarily think they need to change the way they're doing things, or they don't want to. The second one is coaching culture is such an abstract word, and it means, like Kyle said, 10 things to 10 different people. And then the third is even after implementing, when there isn't an overnight change, people don't realize that there's a time to value, which you have to plan into your metrics and plan into what's going on. So having said that, Kyle, I'm hoping you can jump in, maybe share some stories from the front lines across like 1 story each for all of these limitations.
Sure. Yeah. So Yeah, when I think of like resistance to change, I think about the folly of the big reveal, right? Which is like, guys, we have a new sales methodology we're going to be rolling out, and it's just like eye roll city from the crowd, you know. And it's like, so like I've kind of like come to just and now I'll totally go to the bosses and be like, guys, I'm going to implement a new sales methodology and it's going to be awesome. And this is how we're going to do it. And they'll say, great. But I'm never going to say that to the reps, right? Because it's like, we don't need to do that. We don't need to hold ourselves accountable to it. So like change, like everybody is people are going to be resistant to change. That's just a fact of humanity. So we just do it in small increments and build on small wins. And like over time, you'll transform something. But it doesn't need to be like, everybody doesn't need to see the big picture from day one. You know what I mean? They need to see results that change their paychecks, you know, as quickly as possible. And then it's like, what do you got for me next? Right. And the flywheel starts spinning and then you're off to the races. So like the only change is like, we're going to be talking about something new this week. And then I'm going to start coaching you on a reinforcing, right? That's a big enough change without, you know, having to put into this context of how I'm going to overhaul every way that you've sold and been effective here. So that's one thing, is just make a start of it and start small to combat the resistance to change. Yeah. And, you know, culture is vague, and it's, I think, you know, culture, like when done poorly, is just simply the collection of people in your company. Right. And it's like, who did you hire? And then for what behaviors do you fire people? And for what behaviors do you promote people? And the kind of like aggregation of those decisions, it will be what your culture is, you know. And so the way I think that the best cultures I've ever worked at, and Drift is an incredibly strong one. I also worked at Intuit for a period of time. I was there for 3 years after a company I worked for was acquired by them, and they have a very different but also very intentional culture, like befitting a company in the tax preparation and, you know, small business accounting space, right? So, but both of those organizations have the same thing in common, which is like they thought about their culture as like, what do I want to feel like to work here, you know, and then just be very intentional about describing what that means and bringing those to life by having them like make decisions in the room when the bosses aren't there, you know. So, you know, culture is vague for the companies and the situations and the teams that don't take the time to like intentionally define it. So I would be like, hey, do we want people like complaining about the free lunch? You know what I mean? Or do we want people that are focused on the job, right? Like, do we want, you know, infighting and bickering or cooperation? You know, do we want people sharing best practices, or, you know, gunning for the top results, and that's all that matters? So whatever you reward is going to be it. So just put some thought into like, what do you want to feel like when you work there, and then just like be clear what those are, and then maintain those standards. And that's how I've seen good companies influence culture in a very intentional way, where they know you have to. It's like your coaching program. Like, you gotta know where this thing's going, you know, and then like start saying that from day one. And then like the long time to impact, again, is like, you know, we've talked about this a couple times so far, but it really is breaking down like, hey, we're going to create a call scoring program. So your first target is like, okay, great. Well, how many calls are you going to score? Like, well, we're going to do, you know, 10% of the sales calls that our team has, which equals X amount. So the first check-in is like, well, did you do that then? You know, and like literally reporting on a weekly basis of, like, we have to, you know, listen to calls and provide feedback if we're going to be coaching. Did we even deliver the coaching? You know, and it is hard. It takes a lot of people's time to do that. But just like bite-sizing the steps and being able to show progress. Like here at Drift, for example, like we rolled it out with a call coaching goal that I think in our first week, we hit like a third of it, you know? And it was like, okay, this is like different. But if we hadn't been tracking that and just focused on results, we wouldn't have picked up on that. So it's like, look, we need to coach X number of calls a week. We didn't get there this week. What do we need to do differently? And that's how we developed these scorecards. And that's how we, you know, started enabling the managers to be more efficient with it. That's how we built better trackers in our conversational intelligence platform. And that's how we kind of move forward from there. So just like, you know, like baby steps, you know, and you'll start to see the results, you know, quicker than you might think.
just jumping in here. Limit number 3 there is super interesting to me. So in past roles, been a business development manager, and we do the call coaching every Friday, and because that's what you're supposed to do. And everyone actually loved it. We had a really good culture. People were bought in. People would look forward to it. But I think where we fall short now, like listening, where we fell short was not having like a North Star to like guide us. Like, what do we actually do? We would look for like very quick wins, actually. Like we go on Friday, have all these breakthroughs, and then I would go and I would listen to my reps on Monday and Tuesday. Next week, they listen. That's great. That means they've got it because they implemented it like one time. And there was no like long-term kind of North Star, which I think is, so unbelievably important. And then giving yourself time to actually get to that North Star as well. It's interesting.
That's good. I want to switch gears for a second. I want to get a little more personal with Kyle. So we're going to segue into the next kind of topic here, which is common challenges to overcome when creating a coaching culture or creating a program in and of itself. And so, Kyle, I'm going to kind of lead you on to the story that we talked about, where eventually we'll get to a place where hopefully at the, with some time remaining for questions, you, the audience, will be able to understand the core components of what to do so that you can know to move forward with a plan of how to do a coaching program. So before we jump into what the components are, I'm hoping, Kyle, you could tell us a little bit about your experience in before figuring out that something clicked, what was happening, and then how did you get somewhere? You were like, this works, now I know what to do.
Yeah, so the first thing to do, I think there's kind of like 3 phases to that, and like having if you think about like the best trainings as being like interactive and engaging, and like everybody talks and everybody contributes. That's not like me going in and just like pointing on people to like answer certain questions that I have, but like actually like the training can be like an assignment, like, hey guys, we're going to build some playbooks to go after these personas or whatever, right? That people get more engaged. But the point is, like, when you bring people in for training, just start doing stuff, and you can tell whether it's working or not. You can tell if people are like feeling you, if they're leaving the room excited, if they can't wait to get on the phone and try that new thing. And then when you listen to it, whether they're doing it or not. So you will actually arrive at kind of coaching and training models over time of doing it. So I didn't build out an entire program before I started training people at Drift or at Copper prior to this. We just started doing it. And then if we had really great conversations that the reps found valuable, that they're able to use with effect afterwards, we made that a thing that was then durable and would work with new reps who were onboarding after that. So the first thing is experiment. You don't have to have all the answers. And if you kind of let everybody shame you by making fun of one of your calls first, like no one expects you to have the answers. And you just are playing the role of facilitating learning for everybody. And so you can kind of create the freedom to experiment live with people when you're providing training, I should say. And then that becomes something that is in your LMS that you build content around, that becomes like durable part of like your onboarding and certification process at your business. But then, so you basically teach everybody one way to do it. Like, think about like, what's one process, one methodology that, will be effective in, 60 to 70% of our sales conversations. And this is assuming that you're at a shop that does not have a formal, like, dynamic sales process and sales methodology. And most businesses won't. I mean, like, up to a certain, like, a lot of companies are just kind of like, have a random or informal process, which is fine. This is like, if training is done through tribal wisdom, that's a good way to know whether if that's who you are. But that's completely fine. But the thing that, like, you start thinking about specializing and corner cases and like, how do I deal with this thing? And especially if you've grown your business through an inbound environment to that point, now you want to go outbound, you got to start thinking about industries and personas and use cases and things like that. And that can like quickly get very overwhelming. Like, if you try to go after 3 different personas in 3 different industries with like 3 different use cases of your product, you quickly have like a 27 block matrix of like sales process that you now need to train. And that's just bananas. So you can't do that. So I try to figure out like what is the best like organizing idea for how we're going to distinguish where people like how do we make us effective and appropriate for where the buyer's at. And the thing is the buyer's journey, in my opinion. And this is like, if you're prospecting, if you're a BDR or a sales rep and you're prospecting and you're like, all right, I got 3 hours to prospect. Like, you're not going to call like your sales hacker webinar leads, one of them, and then a trade show lead, and then a trial sign up lead, and then an expired trial, or what, like, you're going to like pick a tranche of people that are probably going to be receptive to the same message and like go after those like consistently so you can kind of get into a rhythm and get it down. So it's the same way, like, people across industries and personas are going to be responsive or going to like respond well to a similar message if it's organized around where they're at in their buyer's journey. And it's starting there. So like if somebody is, and here's how this most commonly comes to light in sales execution. I see a lot of people like sending out like prospecting emails or vidyards or GIFs with like anything about our product. Like they're showing the product to somebody who they're reaching out to for the very first time. And that is just like utterly unhelpful, I think, when you're targeting somebody, because if they didn't come to you, they don't know who you are, and you don't have any indicators that they've been hitting your website or downloading competitive software or on a free trial or anything, then the first thing you need to do is like talk about the problems that you solve, that you think they're having. And I would say like even, like take a home run swing, like talk about something that like you think they're personally experiencing. And it's either gonna be a total whiff or it's gonna like cut to the bone. And if it cuts to the bone, they'll take a demo with you. But that you have to stand out that way. And so you got to think about like what problems are they having? Yeah, there we go, the improvement funnel. So like brilliant slide. What problems are they having? And talk about that. And if you can articulate the problems that someone's having better than they can, they will immediately assume that you also have the best solution for it. Like you don't even need to say it. So but the problem is like people will target like people who are early in a buying stage with stuff about my product, which they only care about once they're actually in a sales cycle, which they aren't in right now. Right. So it doesn't matter what industry they're in, it doesn't matter what their title is. If you can talk about what their problems are, that's going to be more effective and more appropriate. And that I found to be like kind of the best organizing idea. I don't even know if that's a novel thought, but it definitely works in my experience.
So walk us through this slide. Walk us through from end to end what's happening.
Yeah. So the biggest one of the biggest mistakes salespeople make consistently is that they fail to diagnose where the customer is at in their buying cycle. And what this usually means is that when we get on a demo, we think we're in a sales cycle because we have an opportunity record in Salesforce and we prepared for it and they have a meeting on our calendar and all these other things. Most buyers don't, and I've been the buyer, I've been the seller, like most buyers don't think they're in a sales cycle until at least after that first meeting, when they're deciding whether this is something that I'm seriously going to pursue or not. So this leads to, kind of unnatural acts and ineffective behavior, like asking for their business or like sending pricing and stuff like that at the end of the call. It's like, we need to first, understand the problems that you're having, or I can help teach you more about the problem that you're experiencing and like the nature of it and like what like greatness might look like in the area of that problem. And then, yes, we might be able to help with that, right? But the outcome should be, I am going to seriously evaluate I'm going to look at you. Like basically, I'm going to qualify you in that first demo. Like the customer is going to qualify us, if that makes any sense. So yeah, what are the customers trying to do? How would we change their lives? What our category does, and then you get into like a sales process.
Great. Scott, can we take any questions from the audience before we move a little bit further and give a preview for next time?
Yes, absolutely. Let's do it. Okay, so we just got a good one here. Thank you. I think it's like the name Scott. And yeah, if you guys can actually go to Q&A, that'd be awesome. Chat just doesn't have quite as many features. But anyway, when setting up new sales processes, how much time do you recommend sales reps spend researching the industry, outlining the buyer's journey and setting up sequences versus just getting on the phones and learning from experience? So I guess planning versus doing is the question.
Yeah. So I would say I would go with the 30-70 rule, right? So maybe like a little bit of time plan. Well, so here's the thing, like your company is probably premised on a very specific thing. Like you guys exist because you saw something in the market that represented an opportunity, an unmet customer need that you think you could, build a product that can help solve. So you already have like a value thesis just by the existence of your organization. Like you guys are there for a reason. So, I would suggest like, maybe it's not like researching the customer and the industry and all that kind of stuff. It's like more a matter of target picking, right? Like if you're going to do the kind of like first outbound crossing the chasm type of thing, you want to go after people that you solve their problem the best. You're like number one home run use case. And if you limit the prospecting list or the people you're going after to like a small subset of your total addressable market and the people that you could probably serve the best right now, then that shortens the amount of time you need to do on, like industry research. Like that should be something you guys decide as an organization that you're going to go after that way. And then like kind of make it simple for the sales rep. So, you don't want to give them when they're first starting out, like this, like really target rich environment that will, it requires more, I guess, individual prep and research. Like kind of do it for them and then get them on the phones.
Yeah.
I want to talk about something else that's really important. So Kyle touched on this before when he was speaking about the slide and before in the talk track he was using. Don't expect to make changes without having first measured your baseline. Because as soon as you make changes, you will inevitably use the qualitative feedback that you're getting as a signal that things are working. But just like Kyle mentioned with the director level and executives, they don't care about that. They care about the value and the results. So if you start with the baseline, identify what your metrics are, identify how to measure them, etc., then you start making changes, you get that qualitative feedback, you go and remeasure the results, then you can prove that things are working. Just don't put the cart before the horse and get started before you've done that. Now, if you want to get tactical on how to do this, what you can do is take your best rep or 3 reps or whatever and go and just audit what they do and put together a one-sheeter of like every step and stage of the funnel, entry and exit criteria, what's happening, what do they do, etc. Try to come at it from an objective point of view because you're documenting this. Then you have the same thing for 3 reps. You combine it into 1. There's your baseline. Then you move forward. Then you start making changes. You can talk about it as experiments in 1-week sprints. You can talk about it as a general picture, etc. But at least you have somewhere to start a foundation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. That is great advice. And I feel like, especially when you're like new manager, if you're like new to management, I think it's so easy just to base someone's like, oh my gosh, we used video in this email and this person gave me a positive response and now I told everyone and now everyone loves it. And you're like, okay, then video's like the way to go. But if you don't have like hard data to back it up, that could have just been, a one-off. And I think you see that a lot in programs. And then you just get down these muddy waters and you don't even know, where you're at anymore. Yeah, I love it.
Totally.
Great question here as well from John Reacher. John, thank you so much for the question. How much pushback do you get from frontline managers who now must review conversations and call metrics? He says that takes time. And it's a 2-part question. And what do you do to dashboard key KPIs so that they save time and focus on gaps? Who wants to start? Kyle, go ahead.
Yeah. So so the first thing is like on like identifying gaps. We have our sales ops team present like a monthly business review for everybody on the floor. which is like, it's nothing too crazy. It's just basically their sales math, right? Which is like, this is, how many leads you contacted and how many opportunities that became. And then out of those opportunities, how many you closed and what your ASP was, and just breaking down that kind of like the individual funnel for every salesperson. And then it's like, okay, so if you want to hit your, like whatever more next month or next quarter, then taking those ratios and just assuming the ratios stay the same and like showing the amount of activity that's going to have to go into hitting that in the next month. And then you can start like stress testing some of the ratios, which is like, maybe you compare to the average rep, you're really good in opportunity generation, but not so much on closing. So we're going to focus on that, right? Or if you're very good on closing, but not so much on opportunity generation, then let's talk about how we're going to prospect and do coaching around that. So I think providing that or getting your ops team to provide that is something that both my last companies did that was extremely effective. And we start every single month, like the first or second business day of every month, we start with a review of the previous month to kind of set the table for like what we're going to do differently. And that's like, I think a really important thing to like identifying gaps, because to your point, people do push back on training if what they're being trained on is redundant. Like if they already have something mastered and you drag them through the training anyway, then they're going to check out, and then their body language becomes infectious and it kind of can spoil it for the group. So that's definitely one thing. And then for the managers, here's exactly what happened here is that there wasn't pushback so much. Like nobody didn't want to coach calls, but this was something where if I say, hey, coach one call per rep for each of your reps per week, that sounds like a small ask, but the calls are an hour long and you've got 8 of them. And so I just added like 20% more work onto your weekly schedule. And it's not like they're sitting around looking for stuff to do. So you got to think about like, you might have to prioritize and be like, well, listen, how are you spending your time right now? And decide what's more important, this like thing that you're doing or coaching your reps. And I think if you would ask people to like log their time, like not from like not we're going to do this forever. This isn't a micromanaging thing, but I just want you to like literally, how did you spend your time every day for a week? And then review that with the reps. They're going to realize that they spent a lot of time doing stuff that wasn't, revenue generating for their teams or for themselves. And that's probably a place you can swap out and insert call coaching.
Yeah. Makes sense. And it goes back to, way back when we started this webinar an hour ago, it was 75% of businesses think that sales coaching is the most important thing to do. So if you're not carving that time, right, it's about prioritization. It should be the number one thing. And sure, maybe a few things you'll have to cut out of your schedule, but you just got to make time for it. Matt, are you on the same page there? How do you, because you guys have a ton of feedback on this because you're implementing conversation intelligence. Do you guys get any pushback from frontline managers, or are they like wholeheartedly embracing this typically?
So we work with enablement professionals, sales ops, VP of sales across the board. Let me break it down. I know we're limited on time, so I'll give a kind of a quick answer, and then I hope more of this is shed in future articles and other things that we create. On the two ends of the spectrum, there are organizations that are growing so quickly, 100 reps a month, like that equivalent, that they know they have to figure out coaching, and it's a part of their culture and it's embedded. And now they're thinking, well, my managers actually don't have time. So they're thinking of the next level, which is peer coaching. And that's something that we're enabling them to do. On the other side of the spectrum, there's companies who are just getting started and they're not sure what to do, and they know they want to grow, and they've just had some investment, and they're getting things sorted and settled. And I think that's where most of people are. And hopefully over the next, webinar, people will be able to get more context. I just wanted to share this one slide with you. Hopefully this will provide some insight. Tomorrow we're going to send all of the attendees of this webinar our how to implement a coaching culture in your sales team. And in here, you'll find all sorts of facts, figures, and also insight to effectively inspire you. And the goal there is that before the next time we have the part 2 of this webinar series, you'll be able to have some really educated questions and come to the table. Kyle and I are empowered next time to meet with you so that we can go over how Kyle operationalized his strategy into what he does at Drift, and hopefully leave you with really tactical next steps so that you can do the same thing in your org.
Awesome. Perfect. And that takes us to time. So Matt, Kyle, thank you so much for this conversation. I personally learned a ton. I'm looking forward to part two. And for everyone who joined us, thank you so much for some amazing engagement throughout. And have a great rest of your week.